Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Okay, so we're starting a new chapter. It says here, "En tzadim dagim mina bevarim b'yom tov." That on Yom Tov, we're not allowed to catch fish, right? Ve'en notnim lefanea mezonot, and also we shouldn't put food for them to eat. Ve'im satam emet amamat hamayim knisa u'vetziah. It says if he closed up the flow of water, right, coming in and out, Me'erev Yom Tov, from Me'erev Yom Tov, mutar lekach mimenu dagim, then you're allowed to take fish from there. B'Yom Tov and Yom Tov, dehave elahut nitzodin, because they're already trapped as it is. So why is that? Because they can't really go anywhere, right? They're like in a little pond there. So that little pond, is like pretty much they're trapped already as it is. So you just go in and take. That's what he's saying. So it says even doubtfully, catching fish is forbidden. For instance, let's say you had already a trap, set up to catch fish or some other animals on before Yom Tov. So he says, and then tomorrow he found, right, that something was trapped there. He set a trap, and the trap caught something. So you're not allowed. So you're not allowed to take that animal unless you know that it was caught before the holiday. But if it was caught on the holiday, you're not allowed to take it. So he says, what about chickens that you have in the house? So those you're allowed to take them, right, for slaughter. Or geese, right, whatever, right, birds. And you don't need to designate them. So he says also, when it comes to other animals or birds, if they're lacking hunting, right, the trapping, so then שצריך לומר, הבא מצודה ונצודנו, right? So have מצודה. So we have to say, right, to bring a trap and to trap it, אסור לצודה. You're not allowed to trap them. וניתן לפניהם מזונות, and also to give them food as well. בכל שאין מחוסרים צידה, so it says, but if they're not lacking trapping, מותר לצודן וניתן להם מזונות. So you're allowed to trap them, and also you're allowed to give them food. So in other words, what are we saying here? That if the animal is like already in your house, right, or wherever, right, so it's already trapped as it is. So then you're allowed to take it, for the sake of slaughter, number one, and also if you want to feed it, you can feed it. So what does that mean? You can put some food there, and he'll eat, right, the food, whatever you put there. No problem with that. But if it's something which you have to trap, So what does that mean? That it's not in your house. You have to like go out and catch it, before it runs away somewhere. So there, right? You cannot trap them, and also you cannot feed them as well. Why is that? Because they're not really, it's not really your job to feed them since they're, self-sufficient. They run around or whatever, so they're not really depending on you so much. They're like just, wild, running wild. So that's why you're not allowed to. Okay. So that's interesting. Let's see a bit Yosef on that. So it says Bet Yosef here, regarding that which was said, right, that you cannot hunt animals. Where is the source for this? Mishnah Beresh Perek Gimel de Betzah, right? It's over there in Betzah, Chav Gimel Amud Bet, and Sadin Dagim Mina Bevarim. So it says there, right, you cannot hunt you cannot catch the fish, right, from the ponds. B'yom tov, on Yom Tov. Ve'en notnin lifnehem mezonot. And also you cannot feed them as well. Aval tzadin chayav of min habevarin b'yom tov notnin lehem mezonot. But it says that when it comes to birds and animals, like mammals, whatever, you can hunt those from the, your like whatever your ranch there, whatever you got there, right? Your where you put your animals there, and you're allowed to feed them also. So why is that? Because they're like pretty much your responsibility since they're they're on your property, whatever they live there. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, Lo kol habevarim shavim. So it says that this rabbi, not all the ponds or whatever, or all the ranches, whatever, are equal, right? Ze haklal, kol hamechusar tzeda. So the rule is like this, right? What does it mean they're not equal? Depends on if it's lacking, trapping or not, right? If it's already trapped as it is, so then you're allowed to do what you want, But if it's not trapped, so what does that mean? It can like run away from you, and leave. Right, so there, right, you cannot do it. You cannot do nothing there. Cannot feed them, and cannot trap them either. Cannot catch them. Okay. Rashi explains there, right? So Rashi says, right, why aren't we allowed to feed these animals, as we said, right? What's the reason? So he says, because, they're self-sufficient. They can take care of themselves. So they don't really need your sustenance, you know what I mean? So why is that? Because they have right in front of them their diet, right, which is their the grass, right? They eat grass, these animals. So the grass is their food, so they don't really have a problem. That's what he says. Right, whether it's the roots or whatever. וגדול אוכל את הקטן. And the big ones eat the small ones, right? Whatever that means. I guess he's saying that the big animals eat the small animals, whatever. So yeah, the Ran katav. So the Ran says the Perek Rabbi Eliezer the Oreg Peresh Rashi the Tama de'en notnin lifnei mezonot mishum dechivan demuktzin hen. So Ran explains it differently, right? The Rashi. I don't know where he gets his Rashi from, but he says Rashi is saying the reason why we can't give them food is because they're muktzah, these animals. Lo shara lemitra chalayim. So therefore, we're not really right allowed to, to exert ourselves for them. So the word here muktzah, what does it mean? It means that they're not really like within our realm of possibility to do something with them on the holiday. We're not really we don't have anything in plan, in store for these animals to do something with them. So they're independent basically, right? So they do what they want, and we're not really we don't really have them in our repertoire, right? On Yom Tov. It's not really a part of our program. That's what he means to say. Okay, so good. So it says also the Yerushalmi, it implies like this, whatever. That's written like that. The Garcinan Hatam, because it says there, Lafish eno sin takana, the davar she'eno mina mukhan. Right. So same thing it says there, that we're not really supposed to, work towards these animals since they're not really within our program, right, on the holiday. We're not going to do anything with them. We have no plans for them. Katav v'hatanan, so he writes, right, that we learn in the Mishnah, mechatchin et hadeloin lifnei habehema bet hanevela lifnei haklavim. But it says, right, in a different Gemara, that we're allowed to feed the animals, right, on, right, whether it's Shabbat or Yom Tov. Cut, food for them, right, to cut it for them, to feed them. So then why here do we say that we cannot? Right, it's talking about all kinds of animals, right? Mammals, right? Or even dogs, right? Let's say a person has some dogs on his property, right? By the way, the truth is, right, that we spoke about this. I posted about these things. The truth is, that it's not really a Jewish thing to have an animal, as a pet, like per se, like especially a dog. Like in the house, as a pet, like, to pet him, and to play with him and stuff like that. It's like a very goyish concept, this kind of thing. So in those days, they had dogs for a different purpose, right? Which was to guard, the animals or whatever it was, right? Or to guard them, right? To guard themselves, right? So that's the reason why they had dogs in the house, right? And they didn't have it really in the house. It was like more, in the yard, right? Right in the that's really the way it was in those days. There was one lady, that I spoke about this to, because she had some pets. Now she got rid of them, Baruch Hashem. Thanks to me, she got rid of them because I told her to get rid of them. But right, we had like a little bit of an argument, So she tells me, well, she says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right, had some, had a dog, whatever, right? So I have some friends who are Chabad, so I spoke with them, some rabbis. And I asked them, I said, is that true? Lubavitcher Rebbe had a dog. Is that really true? As a pet or whatever? So they all told me the same thing, that he had it because of security purposes. I mean, it wasn't because he wanted to pet the dog, and play with him, play footsie with the dog. That's not the reason why. He just had he had a security issue, because he had some people who were his enemies, they didn't like him, famous people always have enemies, I mean, they always have people who want to hurt them, and they get threats, all kinds of stuff. When you get famous, things get a little bit hectic. That's the way it is in life, my Rabbi Maran Shalom Ovadia, he, they tried to kill him like 2 or 3 times. I remember, the Arabs, tried to kill him, tried to assassinate him. And the plot was foiled every time. Hashem was protecting him, he didn't need a guard dog, believe me. Hashem was doing the guarding for him, So they were trying, they planted some, some people there, near him to spy on him and to hurt him, but they never succeeded, Baruch Hashem. That's the way it was. Always their plan was foiled. Somewhat miraculously, I have to say. Anyway, right? There was one I had to tell you. It's so funny, I remember, right? Because I was the rabbi's neighbor. Also, I lived there, right there in that, the same area. So, there was like a fruit store there, selling fruits and vegetables. Fruit vegetable store, good quality stuff they had there. Nice store. And what happened was, right, that these Arabs were trying to kill him, So what they did was they planted two workers, at that store who were working there, and trying to like, gather information and, try to make like a plot, to kill the rabbi. So they're planted in this store, you know what I mean? And what happens is, right, that they're speaking in Arabic, so, they think that nobody can understand them, what they're saying, but there are some Sephardi Jews who speak Arabic. They understand Arabic very well. You know what I mean? In Israel, there's many of them like that. So what happens is, right, that there's this Jew standing there, with the two Arabs, and they're talking about, plotting to kill the rabbi. Can you imagine? And he overhears them. So right away, he calls the police, right? And right away they came and they arrested them. It was really pretty shocking, and it happened again, like several times like this. Every time they tried to kill him, Hashem would save him. It was so funny. There was even one time they planted a maid, like a Russian lady who was working in the rabbi's house as a maid, not Jewish, goy, and they caught her too, they arrested her. She was planted there by Arabs, to gather information on him. So, right, this is the situation that we're in, right? So, why am I telling you all this, right? This is not story time, right? I'm not telling you your stories. But the point is that, we only have dogs because, for guarding purposes. We don't have dogs as pets. It's not a Jewish thing to do that, right? There's many sources in the Talmud and, that speak about against doing that. Not a good idea, really, Anyway, whatever, right? But the truth is, that the halacha says that, if it's not a bad dog, like in other words, one of those nasty dogs, like, pit bull, or Doberman, right? Or, Rottweiler, these are like dangerous dogs. They can kill people, they've killed people already several times. It's happened several times. It happens all the time, like especially pit bulls, they're very dangerous. I remember in Israel, there was also a Rottweiler, that killed a child, like when I was living there. Tore the child apart. And this was the owner of the family of the owner, not a stranger's child, not a stranger, the family of the owner. He tore the child apart, killed him. Right, so that's why you're not supposed to have these dogs, especially the dangerous ones. But they say, if you have a, like not one of the dangerous types, I mean, it doesn't bark, like at people, it doesn't, doesn't threaten, or bite, whatever. So if you have it on a leash, it can be allowed, if you have it in control. But the truth is, that it's not really recommended either way. This is not the proper way, especially according to Kabbalah. There's all kinds of things like that. So anyway, right? When we talk about dogs, we're talking about dogs that are outside, for guarding purposes, to guard the animals or to guard whatever, right? The family, whatever it is, right? Whatever it may be. That's the idea. So anyway, right, getting back to what we said. So you're allowed to feed the dogs, because they belong to you. You're allowed to feed them. That's okay, מטלטלין את האלוף מפני שהוא מאכל לעורבים, right? It says if you have like if you have like birds, and you want to feed them, so you're allowed to carry, certain things which are food for birds, like all kinds of things which are not, humans don't eat these kinds of things at all, right? This kind of food, but they're fitting for birds, so you're allowed to carry it for that purpose. So what does that mean? It's not considered to be muktzah, these kinds of things, because the birds belong to you. This is the reason why. Okay, so anyway, right? So he says, nevertheless, so he says that's not really a question. Right? In other words, there's no difficulty here. Why not? So he says the ones that we're allowed to feed, what are we talking about? We're talking about the ones that are, like designated for some purpose, right? For the human. He's going to do something with that on the holiday. So therefore, since he has some, business with it on the holiday, so he's allowed to feed the animal. that's something else. But right, because they're he owns them, right? They're under his wings. You know what I mean? Whatever, right? That's the way it is. But it says when we're talking about animals which are not trapped, right? So there, it's not really your responsibility. They go and take care of themselves. So what business do you have with them? To feed them on Yom Tov. There's no reason for that. שכיוון שאין מזומנים לאדם, אין נותנים לפניהם מזונות. אבל כשאינם מחוסרים צדקה, כגון בעיבר קטן, כיוון שדעתו עליהם, but it says, but if we're talking like about a small pond, right, of fish, and you could easily catch them, because they can't run away. There's nowhere there nowhere for them to run. I mean, they can't get very far. It's a small pond, so they can't really run from you. So therefore, those fish you can feed them, right? Why? Because your mind is on them. Maybe you're gonna take one, to eat whatever, right? Whatever, to prepare it, to cook it, whatever. So they're considered to be like under the ownership of the person. So we're allowed to give them food. So in other words, there's no contradiction, right? One is talking about animals which are under your guise, right? Under your ownership, right? Your responsibility, and the other animals which are wild, they just go run, right? They roam around, right, all over the place. They're not your responsibility. That's the whole trick. כתב עוד, אבל צדין חיה ועוף מן הבברים, ונותנים לפניהם מזונות דחיה ועוף בבברים ניצודים מלומדים. So it says also, right, these kinds of animals, which are already trapped, birds, and wild animals that are in like, some kind of a barn, whatever. So those are already trapped. So you're allowed to feed them, and to use them, if you want to eat, right? Whatever. You want to slaughter them, you're allowed to. Why is that? Because they're ready to go, right? They can't run anywhere. Where are they going to go? They're trapped as it is, right? So they have nowhere to go. Okay. Let's go on. So it says, רבי שמעון גם אומר, לא כל הבאברים שווים, דאיכא באיבר גדול, דלא חשיב בחיה ועוף ניצודים. So it says, the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, it really depends on the size of the pond. If the pond is very large, right, so the fish can run away from you. It can keep you busy for a while until you trap it. So that's not considered to be trapped. So then, when is it considered to be trapped? When we're talking about a small pond, right, the little pond there. Right, so there, they really have no, not far to go, right? They don't have much space to get to run away from you. So therefore, they're considered to be trapped. Okay, good. והתוספות כתבו דאין נותנים לפני הדגים מזונות גזרה שמא יצודן, right? So Tosfot says a little bit differently, right? He says the reason why we can't feed these fish is because if we feed them, we may also come to trap them, right? So the rabbis decreed not to feed them for that reason. והרמב"ם כתב בפרק ב' בהלכות יום טוב. The Rambam says what? הדגים ועופות חיה שהן מוקצה, אין משכין אותם ביום טוב, ואין נותנים בפניהם מזונות, שמא יבוא לקח מהם. So it seems like the Rambam is saying like the Tosfot, that the reason why we can't feed them is because you may come to also trap them. וכל שאסור לאכלו או להשתמש בו ביום טוב. So it says whatever is forbidden to eat or to use on Yom Tov, מפני שהוא מוקצה, because it's מוקצה, אסור לטלטלו, you're not allowed to carry it either. So the truth is, right, that when it comes to Shabbat, all the animals are muktzah, so that means that you can't pick them up, and carry them, around the animals on Shabbat. Because there's no use for them, what are you going to do with it, right? There's nothing that you can do. So you can't ride on it, you can't use it to for labor or whatever, all kinds of stuff. To carry a load, you can't do that either, right? We already spoke about that. So there's not really anything you can do with an animal on Shabbat, so it's muktzah. But it says, right, when it comes to Yom Tov, animals that you're allowed to use, on Yom Tov, you can carry them. But the ones that you're not allowed to use, you cannot carry them either because they're muktzah. Okay. כתב רב מגיד דע שאף על פי שעשו באלו שבנין הרואים לאכילה, אלא שהן מוקצין אינו אסור בבהמה טמאה ועופות טמאים. עד כאן השונו. So says this rabbi, Rabbi Magid, that even though, right, these animals, are forbidden because they're not allowed to eat. So he says, so therefore, right, the ones you cannot eat, like, non-kosher animals or non-kosher birds, so those are forbidden to carry on Yom Tov. ועיקר למדע כיוון דמתניתין מחלקה בין דגים לחיה ועוף, היח לא חילק הרמב"ם ביניהם. So he says, right, there's a question on the Rambam here, he asks, which is that since the Mishnah differentiates between fish and other animals, why doesn't the Rambam differentiate between them, right? He seems to put them in one category, the fish and the other animals, the birds and the mammals, right, whatever. ונראה לי שהוא סובר, תנא קמא היה מחלק ביניהם. It seems to me that he holds, says, that the first opinion was differentiating between them. ואין הלכה כמותו, but the halacha is not like that. That's the reason why I didn't differentiate. אלא כרבן שמעון בן גמליאל. Rather, halacha is like this rabbi. וסובר, the רבן שמעון בן גמליאל, חיה הדגים, חיה ועוף. So this rabbi is talking about all three of them. They're all the same. Yukach din kulam shaveh. So therefore, they're all equal, regarding this halacha. Okay. So what's the rule? Right. The rule is that if they're already trapped, we're allowed to take them. Right. B'yom tov and yom tov. And we're allowed to feed them as well. But if they're not trapped, right, so then we're not allowed to take them on Yom Tov. Also, we cannot feed them either, as we said. Okay, good. So it seems like he says that, right, that the Torah seems to hold like the Rabbah and the Rashba. In other words, not like the Rambam. Because the Rambam, as we said, right, doesn't differentiate between those three categories: birds, fish, and mammals, right? But these rabbis, they do differentiate. So what does that mean? They say that fish are different than the other two, as we said, right, originally. The Tab Rabbi Magid says, Rabbi Magid, the Rabban Shimon Gamliel, lo kai ela achaya ve'of, aval dagim bechol bevar asurim. So he says, right, that even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds that there's a difference between fish and the others. And even if it's a small pond, he says, right? So then why are they forbidden, right? If we're talking about a small pond. So he says, they're already trapped, as we said, right? So then why should they be forbidden? So he says the reason they're forbidden is because they're hidden from the eye, because they're underwater. So therefore what? So in other words, it's like out of sight, out of mind, right? Since you don't see it, you really don't have your mind on it. That's the whole thing. So therefore, it's considered like muktzeh, something which you don't really have in your program on Yom Tov. So therefore, he says we cannot feed them either. So he says regarding, right, the other animals, birds and mammals. So there, right, he says that whatever is lacking, whatever is already trapped is allowed. That's Sudan. You're allowed to, catch them, and also to give them food as well. Says that implies even right in the pond. Let me just see how far we have here to go. Yeah, not too much. We can finish this. So he says, even though there's a question here that's coming up here, right, regarding this right theory here, whatever, right? This opinion. Medina socher emet hamayim, amat hamayim, right? Sheitber b'samuch, right? So there seems to be a contradiction between this this rule and what we're going to learn later on regarding, right, somebody who stops up, right, the flow of water, right, some kind of a dike, whatever. Sheitber b'samuch, that we're going to explain later on. Kemo sheiksha Rav Magid, like the Rav Magid asked the question there. Kiechi de mitarza hai kushya aliba de Arabad verashba. Nami ledat Rabenu, right? So he says the truth is that just like you can answer that question regarding the Rabbah and Rashba, also you can answer the same thing regarding the Tur as well, because it's the same opinion. If he holds like that, right? So it says also the truth is we can explain the Tur in a different way as well, right? It could be, right? It says that the Tur really holds like the Rambam. That's interesting. How is that? Right, the dagim shavim lechaya ve'of, that really a fish, are equal to the other two, right? Birds and mammals, right? The Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel adagim namikaeh, because the Rashbag is even talking about the fish as well. So he says that in their ponds, right, they're already trapped as it is. Mutar lekachmen. You're allowed to take those. Just like it implies in that Gemara that we spoke about. So therefore, right, that also implies that you're allowed to give them food as well. So therefore he says he didn't really explain this, he didn't bother to go into the details here. So in other words, he's saying, right, that it could be that he holds like the Rambam really. The Tur. ויותר נראה לומר שסובר רבנו דדגים אפילו אחד מותר לקח מהם אין נותנים בפניהם מזונות. But it says, that the better way to explain it is that the Tur holds that even though we're allowed to take some of the fish, right, because they're already trapped, but he says we shouldn't feed them. Why? Mitama de Pirish Rashi, because of the reason of Rashi. Why? Because they can, they're self-sufficient. They don't really need it. So he says, therefore, we don't put food in, right? We don't give them food. It's not talking about trapping. It's really a different element there. So this one means to say, means to say that we don't give them food. So even though, it could be allowed to use them, in other words, to use them as food, but when it comes to giving them, feeding them, that we're not allowed to do. So he says that's the best way to explain the Tur. Interesting. So let's see how he paskins in the halacha. Let's see Shulchan Aruch, right? Yeah, I think we have to bring this up. It's a new chapter here. Okay. So we're going to bring this up. Study design. Okay. So says Shulchan Aruch here, En sadim dagim mina bevarim, right? As we said, we should not trap the fish from the ponds. So says the Ramah regarding this, right? Hagam, afilu b'makom she'ena mechusayim tzedai. Says even in a place where they're already like trapped, basically, right? More or less. So it says the reason why we shouldn't do it is because, even though they're already like trapped in the pond, but nevertheless, right, he says, since the pond is large, so they could like, run off from you, pretty much, and avoid you if they want. So therefore, you really have to trap them. Because they're not going to come willingly, right? Let's put it this way, right? So therefore, right, this is the reason why we cannot take them from the pond, right? We already said in the Bet Yosef that if the pond is small, we're allowed to take it, right? Because then they have nowhere to go, right? Like a little pool, if you have like a little pool, they really can't really go far. So there, just like reach in, and take it, right? No big deal. But if it's already something larger, we have to run after them, you run here, run there, right? Whatever. So that's already, like a job. So they're not considered to be trapped. Okay, good. So that's the Shulchan Aruch, right? Not much really material here. Let me just see what he says in that here. Yeah, so it seems like we already did this as well. Let me just make sure. That's very interesting. Seems like we did this. Yes, we did. Okay, so we got to do another Shulchan Aruch. Good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So it says Shulchan Aruch Bet, Dagim ve'ofot ve'chaya shehem muktzeh, right? So he says when it comes to fish, right, or birds, or animals, right, which are muktzeh, en mashkin otan b'yom tov. Then notlim mifnei mezonot. So we don't give them, right, the food and drink, right, these animals. As we said, right, what are we talking about? Animals which are, not really, under your, wings, right? Whatever. They're not under your, they're not really in your ownership there. They can run around, they can go, right? They can go, they're like, running free, running wild. So they're not really your responsibility, per se, right? So that's why we're not really, we're not allowed to feed them or to give them drink, whatever, to give them water. They can take care of themselves, they're self-sufficient. They're wild, they're free, right? Whatever. So they can do what they want, pretty much, So the things like that, we're not allowed to feed them. So he says the reason why is because you may come to you also take from them, right? What does that mean to take from them to for food, right? And that's going to be a problem because you're trapping it, and right, as we said, the rabbis already forbade that because they're not really in your house. So you really have to like run after them and trap them. They're not like readily available. They're not like in a barn or something, whatever, right? They're running free. Right? So he says the rule is also like this, right? On Yom Tov. Whatever you're not allowed to eat, right? Animal, or to use that animal, you also cannot carry the animal as well, right? As we said. Why is that? Because since it's not usable on Yom Tov, it's muktzeh, So therefore, you're not allowed to pick it up, and play around with it, whatever, right? You cannot do that. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know.
What about service dogs?
What is that? You're talking about what?
They're dogs that, for instance, for people that they need for seeing,
Yeah, so that would be like the same thing as security,
Okay, it's under that category. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so that would be, in other words, the dog is yours. It's your responsibility. So you have to take care of it, right? Just like it takes care of you, you take care of it also.
Right, but are you allowed
It's
to?
a two-way street, you know.
Right, you feed it, and you feed it,
Yeah.
but are you allowed to like carry it, or if necessary?
Yeah, you can do what you want, you know. Since it's not muktzah, right? You're allowed to use that dog for your purposes, but on Shabbat you're not allowed to carry them.
That's my question. That if on
Yeah.
Shabbat, if it's a service
On
dog,
Shabbat you cannot carry any animal, right?
and the person who's blind and used the
But
dog to.
you're allowed to feed them.
Oh, okay.
So feeding them is okay,
Mhm.
but carrying them is not allowed. So in other words, if you have a dog, right, for security or whatever,
Mhm.
you're not allowed to pick them up, you know, and carry them around, you know, stuff like that.
On Shabbat.
Right, on Shabbat, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. So yeah, right. Also, before we go, before we end it, right? I think we had something that we left off last time, you know, last week when we were learning. If you remember, there was some like question that got left over, right there. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah. So it's coming back to me now, right? This whole thing. I think our question was. Give me one second. Right. So yeah. So if you remember, right, we had this discussion last time that the Ramah talked about the issue of like preparation, right, from one day of Yom Tov to the other. So you know, there's a rule like this right in the Talmud in Masechet Betzah, brought down in the Halacha also, right? That one day of Yom Tov doesn't prepare for the other day. So what does that mean, right? For instance, let's say you know you're making some food, right? So you shouldn't make food the first day of Yom Tov to use the second day, because one day of Yom Tov doesn't prepare for the other. There's a rule like this. So you can only prepare on Yom Tov something, right, to cook whatever it is, right, to cook, right? You can only prepare something which is going to be eaten that day. And if there is some leftovers, you can have the next day as well, you know. But you have to eat some of that also today. In other words, you know, it should be for today. If there's leftovers, very nice, right? But you know, you shouldn't do a trick, right? In other words, the trick shouldn't be, especially you know, to make more than you need in order to use it, you know, for tomorrow, right? In other words, you know, unless that's the way it's made, you know, in general. Like you know, you make one pot, right? That's normal, you know, like everybody makes a pot of food, you know. So there's going to be leftovers, obviously. So those leftovers you can have tomorrow. There's no problem. But you know, don't make like especially extra food, you know, to have tomorrow, even though you're having some of it today. But if it's something normal, you know, it's okay. You know, no big deal, right? So that's like a rule like this, you know, one day of Yom Tov doesn't prepare for the other day. But the Ramah said, right, that there are certain cases where there are certain things that you're allowed to prepare from one day to the other, right, on Yom Tov. So here the Mishnah Berurah explains, right, what those things are. Right, that's what we were talking about. I just wanted to go through this Mishnah Berurah here to explain to you, because it's actually important, you know, to know these rules. So it says here, Mishnah Berurah, רציתי לומר שבכגון זה של פירות ואוצר שאינו צריך לעשות מעשה ובאמירה בעלמא הרי. Right, so he says, what are we talking about? The Ramah, it says in Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah is allowing you to do preparation from one day of Yom Tov to the other by way of talking, you know, not by way of doing something actually, right? Doing something, as we said, right, is not allowed for one day to the other, but talking is allowed. So how do you prepare by talking, right? What does that mean? Right? How do you do that, right? So he's talking about when you designate something, right? That it should be allowed to use, you know, by saying, you know, that it's designated. So that you can do, even though you're designating it for the next day. You don't really need it today, right? So by talking, you're allowed to do something from one day to the other. But actually doing something, right? So says the Mishnah Berurah, that's not allowed. So cooking is like an extreme example, right, of that, because cooking is like a labor, so that for sure you cannot do. But there are also other things which are not, like labors really, but they're just, exertion. For instance, I'll give you an example, right? Like for instance, like let's say you're setting the table, right, for the next day. Getting the table ready, right? Things like this, right? So even that, you're really not supposed to do, one day to the other. And this is the reason, by the way, they say that, let's say, right, we just had Passover, right? So we had 2 nights of Haggadah, right? So the rule is that you shouldn't set the table for the second night of the Haggadah until, it's already the second day. So you shouldn't set it like, earlier when it's still daytime, because you're preparing from one day to the other. So therefore you wait, how long do you have to wait, by the way? Like 15 minutes after sunset, right? That's good enough, something like that, right? 20 minutes, 15 minutes after sunset, you're good. You're good to go. That's what considered to be the next day, right? So therefore, at that point, you can already start setting the table, doing the preparations, right? Cooking, blah, 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 right? All these things. And also lighting the candles, by the way, right? If you're lighting the candles for the second day of Yom Tov, you have to wait till the next day. You cannot light the day before. Same thing, right? So you got to be careful with that. So that's how it works, So here the Mishnah Berurah is telling you the things which are only like verbal, those things you can do to prepare one day to the other. When it comes to actually physical activity, that you have to wait until the next day, actually, right? That's what it is. Okay, am I being clear?
Can you go back to the Shulchan Aruch on this, please?
Yeah, the problem is that I took it down, so if you want, I'll bring it back up. Just give me a second. Give me a second, please. Okay, for you, we'll do it. We'll do it. No problem. Okay. Here we go. So this was in the Ramah, right? But yeah. Then where was that? Just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. Okay, top Tzaddik. Okay, I was looking in the wrong place. I apologize. Give me a second.
Is it 495?
Yes. I was looking in 96. Second. Okay, now I got it. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, this is the Ramah thing that we're talking about. Right, so it's like the last two lines right here. It says here, "Umutar le'achin b'yom tov rishon le'shani bebet yamin tovim shel galuyot." Right, so the Ramah says that you're allowed to prepare. So says the Mishnah Berurah. What is it talking about? Verbally preparing. That's pretty much a story. Okay. I just wasn't sure what the Ramah was talking about. That's why I looked at the Mishnah Berurah, because I know that it's definitely, generally it's not allowed to do that. So it must be something, a little bit different, right? That's why I looked there. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So all right. So if you rest your case, I rest my case. Okay. So we'll see you tomorrow, Reza Hashem. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
Bless.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best. Bye bye.